Welcome. In this demonstration, we will see how to draw trees with foliage where the branches are showing through the foliage. So essentially in a lot of demonstrations so far, we have essentially drawn, a tree with the full foliage. So in a sense, we used the parallel lines approach, and then we also looked at how to use the scribbly lines. But in the end, the foliage was dense. So in a sense, all the branches in a foliage were hidden. So what we will do in this demonstration is to look at a different way of drawing trees where the branches are visible and then there's a light foliage. So this gives a different feel for the tree. So the tree has main branches showing through, and then there's a foliage at the end. So it gives a nice airy feel to the foliage. So that's what we will look at doing in this demonstration. And what we will also do is to essentially also kind of have a more interesting ground. So in some other demonstration, we have seen how we can have a more interesting ground with different lines and different planes, and that's what we will do in this demonstration as well. So we will essentially draw a tree, where the branches are visible through the foliage, and and have some kind of interesting ground on which we have trees. So what I'm doing here is to just essentially again drawing a very simple basic tree with the branches that are kind of showing through. So essentially what I do, I start by putting down my main trunk, and then I just simply kind of define a bit of branch structure. So over here, and then I have a bit of side branch going like this, and I've covered in drawing these trees branches in detail in other tutorials, so I won't go to detail. But essentially what I will do is draw some very simple basic tree branches, something like this, for example, over here. And then I can have one going on the side over here as well. So essentially what you do when you want to draw a tree with the foliage where the branches are showing through is you essentially kind of create this basic branch structure that is visible over here, and then what we'll do is to add the foliage around over here. So essentially we will not add the foliage over here, but more like at the edges of it, where we will have then the twigs and other smaller branches from where the leaves grow. So let's start by shading our trunk and the main branches. So again, we have seen that we can use different strokes, something like this angular crossing lines, or we can have kind of wiggly lines to draw the tree trunk. So what we will do is to use the wiggly lines for this demonstration. So I'll start by adding a bit of wiggly lines over here on this trunk over here. And again, what I do is I make one edge darker. So over here, I will just make this edge a bit darker. So as you can see, just by adding one end darker and the other lighter, we get a bit of, curvature of the trunk. And also these wiggly lines, they give some indication of the bark for the trunk. For the main branches, what we do is to essentially define their form by using the jagged darkness. So essentially, if I have a branch like this, then this branch is quite thin, so I don't really have this, the space to essentially have a transition from light to dark, something like this. So what I do over here is just to add a bit of jagged darkness. Again, we have seen this in the other demonstrations, but what again, just to show what we do is when we have a thin branch, I just add a bit of darkness to one end, and this is jagged, so it has something like this, and this indicates a bit of roundness for the a bit of volume for the trunk, for the branch, and also kind of indicates some kind of roughness for the bark over there. So that's what we will do for these branches over here. So I start essentially by adding a bit of jaggedness over here, jagged darkness, something like this over here for this branch. And what I also do is to add a bit of roughness to the other end. So for example, if I have this branch, I will add a bit of jaggedness to one edge, something like this, and just to give it a bit more realistic feel, I can add a bit of jaggedness to the other edge like this as well, something like this. So this kind of gives a nice feel of kind of a bit of volume for the trunk, and then this jagged roughness also indicates a bit of bark texture. So that's what we will do. So I go ahead and add a bit of roughness to the other edge over here, and for this trunk I will again darken one end, something like this. So you can see just by darkening, now we have a fit feel of volume for the trunk and something like this. And then the other edge, I'll just add a bit of jaggedness over here, something like this. So here you can see just by darkening one end and adding a bit of jaggedness to the other end, this trunk, this branch has a now feel for a bit of depth, in a sense. It feels more it has a bit of curvature and things like that. So compared to, so again, just when you see it over here, this is your outline. So this doesn't really have any kind of depth or any kind of curvature to it. And the moment I add a bit of jaggedness over here, my eyes, they perceive this darker area as kind of in shade, and this in light, so it brings out the roundness. So that's what we are doing over here for our main branches over here. So again, add a bit of jaggedness over here, and then I can add a bit over here, so something like this. So once we have this, you can add a bit more over here. So what we do is we essentially draw the main trunks the main branches for this tree. And what we can now do is to start to add the foliage at the outer edges. And once you are done with the foliage, then you can add a bit more branches to to your interest. To add the foliage for this tree, we will not use either the parallel lines or the scribbly stroke, because that doesn't work in this approach. What we will use is instead these loops. So So this is also a kind of foliage stroke, and we have seen this used for drawing bush foliage, for example. So this is other kind of stroke that you can use to draw the foliage, a very light, open, airy foliage. So that's what we will do. So I'll start by just adding loops, something like this over here. So what you do is you start by adding these loops, something like this, and they start to kind of give a feel for the foliage of this tree over here, something like this. So now you can see that just by adding these loops, this is giving a nice open airy feel. And then what you can also do is to not to do over these branches that you want to be clearly visible, but just in between them, something like this, for example, over here. So there we have it. So this is how you just draw the kind of bark structure, sorry, the trunk and the branch structure for the trees, and then you start to add this kind of loops to give it a foliage out at the outer edges of that tree. So something like this over here. This is how easy it is, so this is giving a very different feel, compared to the other trees that we have seen at the demonstration, where we kind of drew its thick foliage, and essentially the whole foliage didn't have any kind of other branches visible through it. So this is a nice simple thing that you can do anytime, and these kind of trees, they always add visual interest. And what you can do once you have it is to actually even add a bit more smaller branches. So essentially, if I want, at this point I can just make it something like this, for example, and have one from here, something like this, a little bit over here, so a bit over here, there. So this is all depends on your taste, right? So you can have more branches showing or less branches showing, so you can just go with the main branches, or you can even add a bit of other side branches, something like this. The thing to keep in mind, and it's very important to do, is to make these points where the branches and the foliage intersect a bit darker, and that is how you will get the depth in your foliage. So right now, I mean, if you look at this foliage, this is kind of a bit flat. It looks a bit flat because, again, it doesn't have any variation in its tone. And we have seen, when we were drawing this kind of foliage using the parallel lines or even the scribble stroke, that you have to have the variation, a bit of dark and light in your foliage to give it a bit of volume. So we need to do the same over here. And what we do over here is essentially, make the spot where the foliage and the branch meet a bit darker. So this spot, so what you do is you make it a bit darker. So essentially, what we are saying is that this is where the foliage is dense, and that's why the branch gets hidden from that point onwards. So again, same over here, where the foliage and the branch meet, I make it a bit darker. So this is how you can bring out the volume, and also you give a sense of the foliage hiding the branches at that point. So something like this again, so make that spot. So again, over here there's a branch ending. So now this looks a bit odd because the branch is ending, but there is no kind of foliage to hide the branch, right? So essentially, to hide the branch at this point, we need to have a bit dense foliage. So that's what I do. So once I make it a bit darker, now this has a nice feel that, okay, this branch is going over here, and then because of dense foliage over here, it is hidden. So that's what you do, right? So just make those areas where the branches intersect with the foliage a bit dark, and then gives a nice tonal difference, variations in your foliage. And at the same time, it also kind of serves our mind to understand that these branches are not getting hidden by the foliage, by the dense foliage, because of because the fact that they are dark, they're seen as dense. So now we can kind of make that inference that this dense foliage is hiding these branches over here. So this is now looking much nicer and has a bit more volume. And what you can do at this point is that if you lose a bit of white, then you can just simply go and add a bit more loops at the edges. So at the edges, always make it open and airy. So at the edges, it should be the lightest. So what we'll do, simply add a bit more over here, something like this. So now you can see that there's a nice transition, so that these areas where the branches and the foliage meet, they're the darkest, and then we have a bit of light foliage above it. So this now is giving a nice kind of feel for the volume of the foliage, and is kind of giving a nice density to our foliage. And also the fact that these dark spots, they also hide well the branches that are kind of disappearing into that foliage. So there we have it. And then you can add a bit of a little bit dark here, a little bit dark there as well. But yeah, so something like this. So this is how you can now easily draw a nice tree with the branches and then the foliage through it. So there we have it. So this is, and if you want, you can add a bit more branches over there, but this is how you can do it. And again, just add a bit more dark over here. But again, use this leaf stroke for adding the foliage in this approach. Since we have those branches showing through, it essentially means that the foliage is very open and airy. So for open and airy foliage, you cannot really use this scribble stroke or this kind of parallel line stroke. So these are good for kind of a tree where the foliage is dense, and then you can kind of provide the tonal variation and kind of interest using these parallel lines or the scribble lines. But for this approach where you want to actually show the branches through it, use this kind of loops to draw the foliage. So that's what we just did. So there we have it. This is how you can easily draw such trees. And what I will do over here is to draw one more tree over here, and then create some kind of interesting ground on which these trees rest. So I'll do draw something similar, and over here I'll draw another tree in a distance, so I will make it a bit smaller. So again, always remember the rule of perspective is that as you draw trees, in the distance, always make them smaller. And then what you essentially do is what we have seen in other tutorial when we drew the tree silhouette is to essentially you can just even use a line. So as the trees they go further out, your branches they become smaller and smaller, and at some point you won't even be able to have this light and dark area in a branch because the branch will just become too small. And in that case, what you do is you just have a tapered feel like this. So this is what you can do for a branch far out where you just have kind of a dark tapered, but it's very important to keep it tapered. So what you do is that you just simply draw these kind of branches from this tree over here, something like this. And then what you can do at the end is to then taper them. So essentially we just drew the lines that indicated our main branches from this trunk, and then I go back and add a bit of darkness over here at the base of these lines to kind of taper them. So now just by so again, if you draw a main branch like this, then just add a bit of darkness, and there you have it. Once you taper it, then it looks like a branch a lot more than just being a flat line. And that's what I do. So I go ahead and again taper this a bit over here, and then I add a bit of taper to this over here, something like this. So there you have it. So you can just simply add those tapers and kind of give it a nice kind of feel for the branches that are far out. And essentially there's a solid line because they are far out, so we don't really have space to kind of draw their texture. And also from a far out branch, you just look at, your eyes can only discern the outline of that branch. So something like this. So we have it, there we have it, and something like this. And then I can again go ahead and texture the trunk in a similar manner, right? Just using the jagged darkness, something like this jagged darkness that we have seen in a lot of demonstrations. So I do that, and then what you do is essentially you again use the leaf to add the foliage to the outside edges again, very similar. So you start again. So in another tutorial we saw how to draw the tree silhouettes, and this is the very same approach, but now what we are doing is we are actually also adding a bit of foliage to the silhouette once you have drawn it, and that gives it a different feel. So these are not the bare trees anymore, but kind of a tree far out in the distance where we can see the main branches silhouettes, and then also there's a kind of foliage at the outside edges of it. So there we have it. So again, use the same approach, add the foliage, and make this areas inside a bit darker. So those areas where again the branches disappear, they will be darker. So again, go ahead and add a bit of, again at a distance, you don't even have to use the leaf. You can just use a mark like this, tick 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 tick, something like this. So you can even use that mark. So this this marks and this loops, they essentially give a nice feel for a foliage, an open airy feel for the foliage. So that's what we do over here. Just simply go ahead and add a bit over here, add a bit over there, something like this. So there we have it. This is how you can easily add the foliage over here, and again you can make this area a bit darker over here. So again, when the trees get smaller, you can even just use a kind of shapes like this. So these also indicate a kind of darkness, and that's what I'm doing over here, just to kind of create a bit of darkness inside. And then I again use small marks to give it a nice open airy feel at the edges, something like this over here. So again, just try to create a tonal variation and always make the inside a bit darker, because that area would receive less light than the outer edges. So making that a bit darker and the outer edges a bit lighter gives a nice feel of volume that we have done over here and over here as well. So there we have it. This is how you can draw the trees where the branches are showing through, and at the end you can add more branches if you want. But so this is how they can be drawn. And what we will do in the end in the demonstration is to again draw some kind of a nice interesting crown. So what we see in other demonstration is that we can either just have a grass over here, or to create some interesting ground we draw these lines, something like this. So these lines kind of indicate a bit of imperfection in the ground, so something like this, right? And then what we do is to essentially darken these lines. Also again, then we see this in other demonstration. Then also you can bring out its form by using these parallel lines. So essentially, you draw a line like this to indicate a surface imperfection, and then you darken it a bit, and then add these parallel lines to indicate its kind of form. So that's what we will do. Now I'll just darken this, and then just draw a bit of line like this. Darken and draw a line like this. So what is happening now is that these parallel lines around these surface imperfections are kind of serving to highlight that imperfection. So if you just draw a line and darken it, this is fine. But if you want to highlight this imperfection a bit more, what you do is you just add this line, and that kind of serves to kind of define the form of that imperfection. So that's what we are doing here. I just highlight and then draw a bit of line, something like this. So essentially in other tutorials we have seen that you use these lines to create the ground form. In other tutorials what we did was we simply added these lines uniformly from the far out distant line. But here what we're doing now is to add these kind of imperfection lines as well, and then kind of define these kind of horizontal lines in this manner, in a tapered manner from these imperfection lines. So this is creating a bit more interesting ground cover. So again, just draw a line like this. That is a kind of imperfection. Just darken it a bit randomly and then draw a bit of lines like this. That serves to kind of highlight. So now you can see that, just by having a line, a bit of, darken a line on the ground, a bit of darkening here and there, and then adding a bit of line, this serves to kind of define that imperfection. So now you can see that, we have these kind of imperfections in our plane, which is kind of, interesting in a sense, once we'll add some more cover to it, that that is making it overall more interesting. So again, compare this with the other approaches where we have the ground flat and just a grass on it. So in those approaches, our ground was kind of uniformly kind of flat and had grass cover. But the other approach that you can do to make it more interesting is to add these lines, darken it a bit, and then just add a bit of lines like this. So again, draw a line. This is the imperfection. Darken it a bit over in there to give it some weight, and then add these horizontal lines, something like this, to bring out its form a bit. Now try to maintain this kind of shape like this. So do not add, so if you have a line like this, do not add it, do not add it like this. This is wrong. So what you want to do is, so once you have a line that is defining the imperfection, then you add it in this manner, something like this. So that is visually more appealing. So this defines a kind of imperfection that we have in the ground that we have done over here. So this is how, if you want, you can make it more dense. So for example, here I can go ahead. So it's good to kind of have an imperfection at the base of a tree. So I extended this imperfection, and now I will add some more lines. So this is how you can do it, right? And then if you want, you can add more. So you can either make the ground have a lot of these lines, or you can leave it something like this. So that's looking nice now, right? So now we have a ground which has all these imperfections, and that are kind of making it more interesting. And then what I will do is to add a bit of kind of interesting ground cover, or some kind of grass, or some kind of even tree shrubbery to these imperfections. And the way you can do it is to just use these kind of organic lines, something like this. So we have seen that for the grass you can use small strokes like this. So this stroke for the grass that we have seen in a lot of other demonstrations is good for covering like a uniform layer of grass. But over here what we want to do is to essentially just have some kind of here organic shape. So you can even just use this kind of shape. So there's another tutorial where I've shown the other different kinds of shapes that you can use. But essentially what you want to do is to just use some kind of organic shapes to indicate some kind of plant, shrubbery, or what have you. So that's what I do. Just add a bit over here, a bit over there, something like this. So this is very, very fun to do. Something very organic. You just kind of add a bit over here, an organic shape. Again, you can do something like this. So there's no kind of fixed pattern. It's just that remember not to kind of make it very rigid and uniform. Essentially the aim is to kind of use this organic shape and a bit of loop here, some tick mark over here, some dark spot here to indicate a flower. So something like this. This is the real fun of penning. This is the real power of penning, is that you can just use these kind of marks to indicate some kind of nice landscape ground cover. And there's another tutorial that deals with this in detail. But yeah, essentially you draw these surface imperfections, and then you simply add a bit over here, a bit over there. This is real fun. I mean, you just let your pen wander and add a bit loop here. So something like this. So you can see now you're getting a feel for this imperfections where you have this different kind of foliage, or different kind of small plant, shrubbery, flower, or what have you, right? So something like this, so that gives a nice feel. And as you can also see, what I've done is to use kind of organic shapes, right? So my imperfections are mostly in shape, something like this. This shape is more interesting. So I've not done a flat shape. So I've not used a shape like this. So it's very important to kind of keep all your things in landscape very, very organic looking. So essentially the tree shapes and even any stroke that I'm using has a kind of open feel to it, right? So I'm not kind of using any rigid kind of I'm not using any kind of regular geometric shape, anything like this. They're all very open, organic things. So again, just look at this. So this is kind of imperfection, and if you want to indicate something over here, just something like this. Some simple line here, line there, a loop here, loop there, a bit of darkness to kind of define a bit of density or kind of form, and there you have it. So now this gives a nice feel for this. So this is how easy it is. This is real fun actually. Once you start to get the hang of it, I mean, you'll really enjoy doing just adding a bit over here. This is this is where your creative process can really kind of just enjoy it, so I just go over here and there you have it, right? So we have seen that we also need to ground the trunk, so we need to make the base a bit darker, so that's what I just did over here, right? So now you can see that this tree is part of this imperfection over there, and this is making it more interesting. This is looking nicer, so compared to just a flat ground on which we had drawn trees earlier. So this is the next step where you can create these imperfections and have your trees part of those imperfections. So something like this over here. Again, I will add a bit over there, and if you want, you can just even leave this a bit like this, right? So you can just make it a bit dark. This is looking kind of a hole or what have you over here, right? So you can just add a bit over there. So again, you don't make it uniform, just kind of make it organic and a bit random over here, bit random over there, and there you have it. And if you want, now there's a lot of white spots, so you can leave the white spot as is, or if you want, you can just now add a bit of grass over here and there on this white spot. So again, don't cover it extensively. What you want to do is to give some indication of something over here. So again, use this very small line, something like this, to cover these kind of white spots a bit. So again, just a line or even a dot here and a dot there serves to indicate that there is some kind of ground cover. But again, the focuses are these imperfections. So so the darker tone of these imperfections makes them stand out, but at the same time we don't want to kind of leave the other ground fully white. So what I do is I just simply add a bit of dot here, a bit of dot there, something like this over here. So this is giving a nice feel for something over there, but it is not taking the attention away from our kind of main imperfections, which is which makes the drawing more interesting. So there we have it. So I can add a bit over here, something like this. And yeah, over here, for example, I'm just adding a bit of flower because that's what I decided. So this is real fun, right? I mean, we are not doing any kind of drawing where you're drawing the pencil lines and this is kind of inking it. The real fun with pen and ink, at least as a creative and a relaxing hobby, is to kind of have these drawings where you just start by just putting down some lines and then let your pen wander and just add a bit over here, a bit over there, and then you come up with this nice simple drawing that is just it's small. It's like 4x5, even like 4x4 inch or something like this. So this is small drawings can be easily done in under half an hour, and it's something that you can do anytime and really have fun doing it. So there I just add a bit of flower over here, and then I can add a bit of grass to the base, and again just add a bit over here, a bit over there to the base, something like this, and there we have it, something like this over there. So there we have it. So this is how quickly you can have a nice simple landscape. And in the distance, if you want, again, I always like to have something in my distance, right? So we have seen that there are a lot of elements that we have seen before that you can add. You can have a distant kind of tree line or a mountain. So what I will do, actually, I'll just have a kind of mountain visible in the distance. So you can even just leave the outline for the mountain sometimes. So here what I can do, I can just simply have something like this, and there we have it, right? So you can even have a nice outline for the mountain that will add the interest to your landscape. So we have seen that you can actually go ahead and shade the mountain using these parallel lines and even add a bit of shading to the mountain to bring it out further. But here I can just leave it something like this, just an outline for the mountain over here. And yeah, and then if you want, you can just add a bit more grass over here, something in the distance. So essentially, try to avoid big white spots, unless you're drawing a snow covered scene, in which case they indicate snow. But over here, so what I can even do is to add a bit of imperfection, a small imperfection. Again, the size of your imperfection should decrease with the distance. So as you go out, you should have smaller and smaller. So I have bigger over here and smaller over here, smaller over here, and then I will make it even more smaller over there, something like this, right? So there we have it. So you can add a bit more imperfections in the small imperfections in the distance, and just use dots or something like that to indicate some kind of ground over. So there we have it. So this is how you can easily put together a nice landscape with surface imperfections, and we also learned how to draw a tree with the trunks showing through and a light open airy foliage using these loop strokes. So again, a nice simple landscape that you can do in under 20 minutes and enjoy doing anytime. Thanks. Bye-bye.